Great, thank you. And thank you to
All right.
Chelsea and to
Thanks,
Jackie.
everyone.
That was great. And I think we all agree that those are two companies we maybe would want to start working for if we if we were looking for a job, right? Okay. So I couldn't resist. I said I'm Scrooge. Let's just talk about some of the legal considerations around year-end celebrations. And Matt wanted me to point out that I'm not just a Grinch. I do run MEA's Fantasy Football League. I am running a trivia night at MEA. So I am fun too, but unfortunately, this is the job that you have as a lawyer, is to kind of throw cold water on things. So just, keep in mind, obviously, if you are thinking about having some sort of a year-end, or early next year celebration, obviously you've got your COVID considerations, your safety considerations, but there's more than that, right? The first thing is always religion. It's not a Christmas party, it's a holiday party. Let's be inclusive. Let's be sensitive to the fact that not everybody celebrates Christmas. It's not mandatory, right? It's nice for us all to get together, but when we force people to get together, that's not usually a positive outcome. On top of that, if we make it mandatory, chances are that workers' comp rules apply. So your carrier probably wouldn't like that very much either. Obviously, alcohol for an in-person event. No open bar, no self-service, control the flow of alcohol however you can, whether it's through drink tickets or whatever it might be, professional bartenders who've been trained to spot, intoxication. Make sure you have food, get something to soak up the alcohol, have those non-alcoholic options, and of course have transportation. One of the panelists talked about when they used to have their party in person at the Desmond, most people would sleep over. Great option. But if you are, somewhere out and people are drinking, you have to have people watching out for that. And let's be prepared to get them Ubers, to get them driven home to make sure that they're safe. And of course, harassment, pre-COVID, every year, right after holiday celebrations, we would get phone calls about harassment situations that arose at the holiday party because you mix alcohol, you get people off site. Unfortunately, those are the things that happen. So a couple of thoughts. One is your managers have to lead by example. They set the tone. You set your expectations before the celebration. So you have a communication with your managers, you have a communication with your employees that say, hey, just because we're off site and just because we're celebrating, work rules do apply. And if you do get complaints, obviously investigate. Social media considerations. Do you want employees to be able to be posting on social media, or do you want to control that? Think about that ahead of time as well. So just a couple of things to be thinking about. And again, most of these are no different than they were in prior years, except for the COVID piece to it. All right, so let's turn to COVID. Not a whole heck of a lot going on because we're really waiting for the ETS to come out from OSHA. I was saying before we got on, I just got an invitation to a webinar next week from a law firm who's talking about the ETS. So I'm wondering if they know something that we don't know. So I think this thing is going to drop this week or early next week. So if it does, we'll either, as Kevin said earlier, we'll take the whole day or the whole 45 minutes on Tuesday to cover this, or we'll set up a special session to talk about it. But keep in mind, some employers are really vacillating about whether or not they're bringing employees back to the physical workplace. And I think that's in response, it's a response to safety concerns, but it's also in response to what employees want. So we just saw the announcement from PwC, Facebook, Twitter, Slack have also said, yeah, we're going to let people work pretty much anywhere they want to. Usually there's a requirement, come into the office a couple of days a month. But other employers also are pushing back their physical return to work dates until at least January. And even then, that's very likely to be hybrid. So it's a lot of stay tuned as far as if you're not back to the physical workplace yet as to what you might want to do and what you might want to think about. And it's really, really important to just remember that we're being flexible, just like we've been for the last 18 months. And I talked about this last week, but I think it kind of bears repeating. This is a recent survey that Catalyst did with CNBC, just talking about sort of what employees are thinking around the coming back to work. 41% of those surveyed said they're considering leaving their company because they didn't feel that their company cared about their concerns during the pandemic. So we talk about sort of the inability to find employees. Well, some employees are going to leave employers because they weren't satisfied with what employers have been doing over the last 18 months. 76% say they want their company to make work permanently flexible in terms of scheduling and or location. That's not surprising. I've been talking about, flexible scheduling for 25 years. And the original thought was that the millennials would drive it. Then the thought was that the boomers would drive it. And who knew it would take a pandemic to actually drive it. But I think flexibility is here to stay. And then there's a real disconnect between employers and employees. Most workers surveyed say they're getting the message from upper management that they think that upper management or ownership thinks that employees are more innovative and work harder when they're on site. I had a call a couple of weeks ago from a member saying, we're working through our telecommuting policy. The owner wants everyone to be in person, but the owner wants to work remotely from Florida. Well, what kind of message does that send? So I think we really need to be thinking about what our employees want. I think most companies have proven over the last 18 months that we can work effectively remotely. A lot of us do want to be back in the office at least some of the time. We like being with our colleagues. We like collaborating that way, but every company is going to have to address this issue. And of course, the legal concerns, what laws apply. We've always said that the law of the state in which the employee works applies. Okay, well, that's great. Now, if the employee is working 2 days a week from home in New Jersey and 3 days a week in the office in Pennsylvania, then what do you do? So stay tuned on that. I think the law is going to develop on that. I think we're going to see lawsuits around that. Employees creating that they get the better benefits of one state versus the lesser benefits of another. And New Jersey is certainly one of those states that gives employees better benefits. Of course, immigration issues. I think some people are saying, well, if I can work from anywhere, I can work from Barbados, right? Or I can work from Bermuda, or I can work from, South America. And the answer, I think, is yes, but there might be some immigration issues around that and certainly some tax issues around that. And then, of course, the taxation issue, which I am not an expert, don't claim to be, but talk to your tax professional. If you have employees working in far-flung places, think about what the tax rules might be on that so you don't get a negative surprise at the end of the year. And of course, I can't go a whole day without talking about carrots and sticks. I just heard about this one this weekend. And you think about all these employers you'd like to work for because they're doing such interesting things. I just heard that Vanguard was giving $1,000 per employee incentive for vaccines, and that's a 50,000 employee company. So think about that for a second. And they're not just doing it to push people over the edge. Anybody who got a vaccine is getting $1,000. I think it ends really soon, though. So if you want to go to Vanguard, get your resume in. Joking, of course. But more and more new job postings are listing vaccination as a requirement. I think a lot of employers are saying, well, we don't want to lose current employees over the vaccine issue. We are going to grandfather people. And I think that approach might have some merit. There are just some things to think about. Does it create a recruiting issue, depending on what kind of an environment you're in? Does it create employee relations issues? We're requiring the vaccine. We're only requiring the vaccine for new people coming in. Does that create some sort of an employee relations issue, but also a reasonable accommodation issue? If you're saying to employees that, or if you want to mandate vaccines for certain positions, or you want to mandate vaccines for people coming in, but yet you have people in the workforce who already are not vaccinated, how can you argue undue hardship? How can you argue direct threat? So you're going to have issues with employees coming in who want to be reasonably accommodated, and I think it's going to make that argument, in favor of the employer much more difficult and complicated. And then what about boosters? I had an interesting question this morning on the hotline came through, so I thought this was a good time to address this issue. You've probably seen the CDC guidance by now. For anyone who's gotten the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine, the following groups are eligible for a booster at 6 months or more after their initial surgery series. So it's 65 and older, living in a long-term care setting, or having underlying medical conditions, or living in high-risk settings. So employers are asking, first of all, can I require the booster? I'm mandating the vaccine. Can I also require the booster? It's just a little bit tricky because you potentially have some medical issues going on there, or medical questions going on there. So sure, if your employee that is 65 and older, you can certainly have a conversation with them. Have you gotten a booster? Do you plan to get a booster? And you don't ask why or why not afterwards. But otherwise, you're delving into potentially some medical questions that you really can't ask under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So keep that in mind. At this point, there's no guidance from the CDC, no guidance from EEOC about requiring boosters from your employees. And then another interesting question, CDC is now recommending that if you got the J&J that you get a booster. So the question has come up, well, if I got the J&J, am I fully vaccinated with one shot? good question, right? For now, CDC has not changed their definition of fully vaccinated. Fully vaccinated for now is 2 shots of Pfizer or Moderna, 2 weeks post 2 shots of Pfizer or Moderna, or 2 weeks post 1 shot of J&J. But stay tuned on that. It's entirely possible that the CDC will change their definition of what fully vaccinated looks like. So sort of keep that in mind. So that's all that I have for this week. As I said, we're waiting for the ETS to drop. So I think it's coming, and I think that's going to give us a lot more to talk about. I didn't see much else come through. Kevin, I didn't see anything else come through. Did you, as far as questions go? If you have questions, send them in right now. We got a couple minutes left.
I do not see anything. Just a clarification of someone mentioned about Vanguard. I'd like to hear about MMA and PA on future topics. And I think that's it.
Okay.
Medical marijuana. I was like, what is MMA? Mixed martial arts for a second there. I'm like,
yeah, we can definitely.
Yes.
We can definitely talk about that.
In the spring, we did talk about marijuana, but I think in the spring again next year, we'll see what's new at that point.
Yeah, and marijuana, just to take a second on it, New York and New Jersey are doing some very interesting things around marijuana and testing, not happening yet in Pennsylvania, but stay tuned on that. It's about to get much more interesting. And we've got a question, suggestions for testing options for employers for unvaccinated employees. That's such a great question. I have not heard of any real innovation coming out from the testing companies. I think one of the concerns is that there's going to be a shortage of testing once everything goes through on the federal level. And then there's going to be a lot more requirements for testing out there. So the first issue is there going to be shortages of testing? The other question is, I would get in touch with your insurance carrier. Do they have any plans to cover any of it? I think the answer is probably no, but they may also have some resources for you with regard to where you can do testing. And I think that some of the testing companies, you would think the market would demand that they would start coming out with options to buy in bulk, but who knows?
I did hear some of the concerns that face everyone else with supply chain and is impacting some of the testing, in terms of getting all the raw components that they need. So that was in a CEO group I had last week. I heard that. So like I said, that has to interrelate to the OSHA rules that come out as well.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we're going to learn in the ETS is who pays for the testing. That's been an open question the whole time. So stay tuned.
All right. Well, thank you, Amy. That was great. Hopefully you all got some information about the year end. I thought it was interesting. A lot of people are looking at January, February, kind of give ourselves time to see what's happening. I hadn't thought about that. So it's good to hear that. Everybody have a great week. We will see you next Tuesday. Happy Halloween too. Take care.